Welcome back to the King's Corner, the place for all things Bethesda. I am the KingFanMan. You know, a Bethesda channel wouldn't be complete if it didn't go back at least once and see the beginnings of Bethesda. Now, this is not going to be a history lesson on who started the company or any of those type of facts. We are going to focus on the games, because that's truly what really matters to us, the gamers. The company that we all love today, with storied franchises like The Elder Scrolls and Fallout, with true masterpieces like Skyrim and Fallout 3, now not just a developer but also a publisher, with games like Doom and Wolfenstein, had much more humble beginnings. It all began back in 1986 on the Atari ST. Yeah, that thing. With the classic football game called Gridiron. Now, this first game was a success, and it even came under the eye of Electronic Arts, and they hired Bethesda to make a follow-up to Gridiron that they wanted to call John Madden Football. However, the game Bethesda developed for EA never ended up on retail shelves. This later leading Bethesda to sue EA in 1988 for $7.3 million in compensation. So yes, even though EA got in the way and messed it up, which they do best, Bethesda did develop the very first Madden football game. Just another historic achievement for this storied developer and publisher. Their next game was not so historic. It was a game called Vortex. 2 years later, in 1988, it came out on the Amiga, which I had to look up. It was a Commodore computer just before the Commodore 64. Now, in the late 80s and early 90s, Bethesda found pretty good success making a chain of sports games. Those began with one of their very biggest, and one that literally put Bethesda on the map. In 1988, the same year as the mighty Vortex, Wayne Gretzky Hockey was released to critical and financial success and sold over 350,000 copies. Of course, their biggest selling game to date by far. Wayne Gretzky Hockey was released on the Atari and MS-DOS. This would also be the last game Bethesda would make in the 80s, as they were focused on developing their next title, which was trying to continue the success of the first. Bethesda released Wayne Gretzky Hockey 2 in 1990 on the MS-DOS. The game was a success, but it was kind of seen as just more of the same of the first game, and it didn't sell near as well as the first game either. But it still would end up as the second best-selling game for Bethesda in their short history. Since they had found such success with the two hockey games with superstar Wayne Gretzky, Bethesda chose to make another hockey game. In 1991, Hockey League Simulator was released on the Amiga and MS-DOS. I found it very hard to find information on sales figures or anything like that for Hockey League Simulator, but I found multiple places where you can download the game and play it today. So what better way to find out about a game, especially if you love hockey? I don't. Finally, I found that the game didn't sell near as well as the second Wayne Gretzky Hockey, probably because it didn't have the superstar endorsement and advertisement to go along with it. Since the hockey ice wasn't on fire anymore, insert joke here, Bethesda went in a completely different direction with the next title. For Bethesda's sixth game in 1991, they announced and released the Terminator, based on the 1990 movie by the same name. It was released on MS-DOS, the NES, the Sega CD, and the Super NES. It was a very unique action-adventure unlike anything Bethesda had ever done up until this point. It took place on a maze-like open-world map, roughly 10 by 6 miles, which was huge for a game of that time. And it was a 3D rendered area of central Los Angeles. This was the first game Bethesda made for multiple consoles, which also opened up a lot more sales for Bethesda. This game was a critical and financial success for Bethesda. 1991 continued to be a huge year for Bethesda as they released another game, NCAA Basketball Road to the Final Four on MS-DOS, NES, and Sega. They also made their most famous customer that year when they released Wayne Gretzky Hockey 3 on MS-DOS. Now, Bethesda was seeking the success they had achieved with their first two titles with Wayne Gretzky's name. And many say this third installment was the best, and it did sell very well. But again, probably the most important thing about Wayne Gretzky Hockey 3 was it brought the attention of one young man and made him want to be a part of the Bethesda family.
And one of the first games that I got from Bethesda was Wayne Gretzky Hockey 3. And I got that game, I think it was my senior year in college. I looked at the address on the box and realized that the office for this company was on my way home over, it was over Christmas break. So I drove into the office and just knocked on the door and said, I want to make games, and I like your stuff, and you're on my way back to school, so you should hire me. This is an excellent reason.
Bethesda's next title could definitely be called A New Direction. They had tried sports, and they had tried action sci-fi with the Terminator series. Now they were going to use their new credibility to try another movie title. Now, as many of you know, converting a movie to a game can be a very difficult thing. You need the perfect movie to make the game work, so that's very important. So in October of 1991, Bethesda chose their movie carefully, and they released on the NES, the Sega, and the Game Gear Home Alone. Yes, our beloved Bethesda, the same Bethesda who would make the epic game about dragons attacking Tamriel, literally trying to bring the end of the world. This same Bethesda made a game first about a little boy using light bulbs and spiders to stop the wet bandits. And of course, the game had the classic game over scene of Kevin performing his trademark screaming face with a speech balloon that read, "Oh no!" Doesn't that make you want to go back and play it? But with a huge success of the movie, the game did bring in good money for Bethesda. After Home Alone, Bethesda was in search of their 10th title, and the search still continues today. In the fall of 1991, Where's Waldo was released. Because the game is all about trying to find Waldo, they're still searching. Anyway, that was a joke for those that got it. Bethesda was getting all the cool titles in the early 90s. This was the first video game loosely based on Martin Hadford's book titled Where's Waldo. After Home Alone and Where's Waldo, Bethesda was having an identity crisis. They went back to a place where they felt comfortable. In January of 1992, they announced Hockey League Simulator 2 for the MS-DOS. I guess I don't have much to say about this game. It sold pretty well. I think Bethesda was just needing to chill out. Okay, that was a bad joke. Later that same year, Bethesda released their second Terminator game, Terminator 2029, on MS-DOS. Bethesda had really become a specialist in computer-based games at this point, even though occasionally they would release something on consoles. Most of their big titles were now computer-only games. This deluxe CD edition gave you 34 missions as a member of John Connor's Specialist Operations Group. It was another maze-like huge open-world game like its predecessor. The success of the first two Terminator games and the continued success of the movie franchise caused Bethesda to make another Terminator game the following year in 1993. Bethesda announced and released Terminator Rampage, again for the PC only. The game levels were grid-based this time, 3D mazes similar in design to Wolfenstein 3D or even Doom. Now this was the time when the Doom craze was in full swing. The game was said to have a lot of dungeon crawling elements. Computer Gaming World said of Terminator Rampage that it was a good imitative product of great difficulty and the action was very intense. The year 1994 would change the fate of Bethesda forever. This year would see two major changes. One would be a game series they would begin, and another would be an employee they would hire. The first, yes, in 1994, Todd Howard began his career with Bethesda and was assigned to work on another Terminator game that would come out the next year. At the same time, another team at Bethesda was working on a very special game. Now, the 15th game at Bethesda was not that game. This game was called Delta 5, a MS-DOS game. It was a flying and racing game with planes. The game is out of print now, and not much is known of the sales figures, but the next game Bethesda put out is very well known and very well documented. And as I said, it changed the fate and identity of Bethesda forever. They had been known as the Hockey and Terminator and Home Alone studio. Now they would forever be the studio that made The Elder Scrolls. In 1994, The Elder Scrolls Arena was released on MS-DOS. Most of you know the story. It was originally meant to be an arena game with a few side quests out in the world, but the world and the side quests they found were much more fun than the arena. So they kept adding to the world and eventually made the world and the side quests the main game, and the arena became an afterthought. However, the box art had already gone out, so they had to stick with the name Arena, but it now didn't fit the game, so they added The Elder Scrolls to the name. They followed up Arena's success with the exciting 1995 MS-DOS thriller PBA Bowling. Now that's about all I have to say about that one. Bethesda's 18th game and Todd Howard's first game to work on was the Terminator Future Shock. Came out in December 1995. It was also an MS-DOS release. The game review read, "It is impressive in its ability to immerse the player into the post-apocalyptic world." Sound familiar? The review continued, "It sets itself apart from other first-person shooters with freedom to explore and destroy." Another review called it slick and professional that sets a new standard in movie-to-game license wars. Yet another reviewer wrote, "You can enter almost every building and search for weapons and ammo, med canisters. The exploration and freedom is amazing." Again, sounds very familiar, and it's easy to see why Todd Howard went straight to the top. The game scored very high with fans and critics alike and was a huge financial success as well. Bethesda's next game would be another Terminator game, and Todd Howard would have a big promotion as a team leader on Skynet that came out May of 1996. It was also an MS-DOS title. It was intended to be an expansion pack for Future Shock, but was adapted into a standalone product. Todd Howard was not only made a team leader because of his work on Future Shock, he is listed as the lead designer, so he received quite a promotion from his first to his second game. As good as Future Shock was, Skynet was even better. It received 5 out of 5 stars from Next Generation magazine. Now, the 20th and last game I will cover in my list of beginning games for Bethesda is The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall. Again, the series that we all know that will change the entire face of Bethesda. It will bring them riches they could never imagine when they get to The Elder Scrolls V, and it will give them a new identity when they get to The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind. But Part 2, with Todd as the lead designer, now not developer, there's a big difference, was released September the 20th, 1996 on MS-DOS only. It sold 100,000 copies within 2 days of its first release. The Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall won the Best Role-Playing Game of the Year from PC Gamer and Computer Gaming World. It also won the Best Adventure Role-Playing Software Game from the Cody Awards. It scored 5 out of 5 from the Next Generation magazine and an A- from PC Games. Obviously, it was a massive critical and financial success for Bethesda, much more than the first Elder Scrolls game. This would be the first game that would rival the hockey games and the Terminator games for Bethesda in sales, and would start to turn their identity in a new direction. Now, even though Bethesda's beginning to take shape, with Todd Howard in place and the Elder Scrolls series established and growing, Bethesda's beginnings have truly just begun. There will be a part 2 to this series, where we will see Bethesda's rise from Daggerfall all the way to Fallout 3, so stay tuned. I want to thank you for stopping by the King's Corner, the place for all things Bethesda. If you aren't a subscriber yet, all you have to do is just hit that button in the bottom right-hand corner. Go ahead, it won't hurt you very much anyway. Also, check out my Patreon page. There's a link below in the description on every one of my videos. I am the KingFanMan, and I'll see you guys next time.